Hey everybody, I wanted to do another little critique video because I know that the other day when we did our live, there was a lot of photos, we had a lot of great discussion, and unfortunately I didn't really get to some of these image critique options that we have down here that y'all have posted, so I thought that I'd just make an extra video here because I know that, you know, y'all have been working real hard to take photos, and I want to make sure that you get the most education out of this course and the photos that you're taking. So I'm doing this on my iPad, so if there's any hiccups, I apologize. But so let's go ahead and start here. This one is with is it Rabbit? Let's see, man, I'm always the worst with screen names. All right, so let's look at this photo right here. So we looked at this photo, and you know what I love about this photo? Somebody said it was spooky, right? I think it was Kim. Yeah, spooky. And it definitely is spooky because of all the spider webs and the, you know, I don't know, grass clippings from mowing the lawn or whatever that are stuck in the spider web, and that is pretty cool. Now, if we look at this, you can see the spider webs themselves, and that is like, you know, that's an interesting thing to look at because not often do we see a spider web. We tend to always just walk directly into them without seeing them. So to be able to see it is cool in this photo, and I kind of want to walk through why we're able to see the spider webs in this shot. So if we look, if you want to see small details like rain, smoke, or spider webs here, what we have to do is we actually have to backlight it. So the light has to come from behind of the subject. So as we can see, the camera is pointed at the spider webs here, but we can see that the sun is all the way back here behind the subject. So it is backlighting the spider webs here. And that is how we see small objects like this, right? But there's one additional element that I think might go unnoticed, right? We can shoot backlit all day, but if the background of whatever you want backlit isn't dark, then you're not going to see it. So imagine here, let's see. So let's just zoom into this spot right here, right? Right in between the in this area right here. Well, I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing to or not, but in that area you don't actually see the spider web, and it's because the sky behind it is so much brighter than the spider web that it just blends in, right? So if this was just like an open field, if this house in the background wasn't there, we wouldn't be able to see the spider webs because the sky is so bright that we just wouldn't be able to see it. The intensity would just take up all of the spider web. So as you can see it a little bit up there, and that's just because the, you know, that part of the sky is going to be a little bit darker. But like right here, you can't really see it. Right there, you can't really see it. And again, that's because the sky is much brighter than we perceive it to be. So if you want to backlight something and you want to be able to see it, you need to have a dark background. And in this case, it was the house. So very cool, very cool. All right, let's head on to this one right here. So this was f3.5, 1,250th of a second, ISO 5,000. All right. So if we look at this photo right here, I think having an aperture of 3.5, you know, was good because obviously you want to be able to separate this dandelion here from the background. And I like the depth of field here, but it looks like, unfortunately, behind the dandelion is what's in focus. This guy's in focus when I want, like, my eye goes here. This is the brightest thing. It's right in the center. That's where my eye goes. And unfortunately, this part isn't in focus. We can tell because, you know, we look at that, it's not in focus. But up here, it is in focus. So this is just a case of a missed focus point. Maybe you were a little bit too close, and the closest thing that your lens was able to focus on was this guy back here. But aside from that, I think that the depth of field looks good. I think that f3.5 is probably the right choice for this aperture. It's just making sure that that focus point was right where you want it to be, which is typically the closest thing to the lens, and that's what I'm, you know, is right there. As far as your shutter speed and your ISO goes, I want to bring up a little chart that I got. So as we can see, we're at ISO 5,000. So let's go over here. So we'll say ISO. Just for illustrative purposes, I know that ISO 5,000 is right about there, but we're just going to go ahead and circle this, right? Because it's a third of a stop more than 5,000, okay? And then for our shutter speed, we're going to say that it was 1/1000th of a second. And this is going to give us about as close as we can get. As we can see here on this scale, 6400 is like on the high end as far as sensitivity goes, which means that the higher that you go, the more digital noise you introduce into your photo. So we really want to keep this pretty low. And if we go back to the photo here, oops, wrong one. If we go back to the photo here, there's plenty of light outside, right? I can tell that it's maybe it's an evening, but there's still enough light to go around outside. So what you can do, and here's the other thing, is that what you were shooting wasn't moving. So it's not like a dog running around or kids playing soccer. So we can keep our shutter speed a little bit lower. So even if we keep it at ISO or a shutter speed of 1/250th, that is 2 full stops of shutter speed that we can go down on, right? So that means that now our ISO can be 2 stops less sensitive because on our shutter speed, we're allowing in 2 stops more light. So we can make sure that our ISO is 2 stops less sensitive. So bringing your ISO down to 1600 really ensures that your image is going to be a whole lot cleaner than if you shot it at 6400. So and in this situation, we would have the exact same exposure because we added 2 stops of light and then we removed the 2 stops of light, and that again allows us to have a cleaner image while still keeping the same exposure here. So I hope that makes sense. All right, let's go down to Eli here. Ooh, this is very cool. This is a compositional photo. So what I like about this photo is obviously like it definitely leads our eyes to where to a spot, to a location, which is down here. I like the uniformity of this image, and kind of what we were talking about on the live critique is that it's good to have to be able to interrupt patterns. And in this case, the pattern is everything red, right? And then we use these shoes to interrupt that pattern of everything being red to draw us down to this open area right here. So how could this photo be a little bit better? As far as composition goes, honestly, I think that if somebody was down here in this doorway, that would be a great photo, right? Because there'd be a whole lot of empty space over here that our eye isn't naturally going to want to look at. So it's going to be drawn over here to the shoes, and then the shoes are going to guide us down to this hallway right here, and then our subject would be framed in that. So again, I can tell that you see the point of composition, or you see the role that composition has. It's just, I wish that there was a subject that our eyes were being led to. But otherwise, fantastic find. Would have blurred the background on this one, but I took it on my phone. Okay. So as far as, if we're going for composition, I believe we have, both frames and leading lines. Let me see if I can... There we go. Cool. Okay, so we have both frames and leading lines in the parking line right there, in this... No, that's not it. In this railing, and then in this tree as well. And sure enough, like it does kind of bring our eye to this car right here. But I don't know. I just feel like this photo is missing something. Part of the issue that I'm having is that this tree is actually blocking off a part of the car. So I think my eye just kind of says like, am I looking at the right thing here? Because it feels like intentionally, maybe you should have been one step to the right so that then there'd be a gap there, because there's a big gap right here between these cars, and then there's 0 gap right here between the car and the tree. So bringing in the elements of leading lines and framing would be a lot more powerful if you introduced also the ability to include some symmetry. So taking a step off to the right, maybe the distance between this van and the car would be to here, and then there would be the same amount of, let me see if I can just erase this, and then there would be the same amount of distance between this tree and the start of the car right here, and then the car would fit, in this area or whatnot. So I hope that makes sense, but I definitely see the leading lines here, and I definitely see the frame. It's just making sure that your composition doesn't take away from your subject. So I hope that helps. All right. Back to Kim. Let's see. Wondering about the f-stop. I was far away, ton of distance between my foreground and my subject, like across the street and then some. Also wanted to try to keep most of the barn in focus, so I didn't pick a very small aperture. So I think if we go back to that discussion that we had talking about focus modes and like the distance, how to ensure that, your depth of field, your thing is going to be in focus. I guess this was week one's critique that I did. There is a point in which everything past a certain point is going to be in focus. So the further something is away from your lens, the more it's going to be in focus, as long as your focus point is on that, right? So if your focus point is on this barn, oops, I went to go draw on it again. If your focus point is on the barn and the barn is more than, 30 feet away, the barn and everything behind it is going to be in focus. Now, if you had like a 200 millimeter lens, the case might be different. It might be everything more than 50 feet away would be in focus. But for what you got right here, if the question is, should you have had a larger aperture to ensure that the barn was in focus? No, because to me, it appears that the whole barn is in focus. And again, the question is like, what's the focus of this photo? I know it's the barn, but my eye goes to the brightest part of the barn, which is just the front here. I really don't care about the back side of the barn. And we see the sign right there, and that's where our eyes go to. Now, if your question is, should you have changed your aperture so that your foreground would be in focus? Not at all. I mean, in fact, I think maybe you should have used a larger aperture, something like a f2 if possible, just to blur this line even more, because there's a lot of details in here. There's a lot of colors. There's a lot of shapes and patterns in the foreground, and that can be distracting in a photo like this, because we don't see the bottom of the barn, and in fact, some of the this piece of grass right here is perceptually in when we're comparing the two, it looks about the same size as the barn. So it's taking up a lot of real estate, and especially like this thing right here, like, whoa, this one's bigger than the barn up here to the left. So if you're wondering if you should have got more of the foreground in focus, I don't think so. I think that it might have been more beneficial if you would have got more of it out of focus. But obviously we're have to work within our lens's limitations. So that could be the case. But in a perfect world, that's probably what I would choose. All right. Want some feedback on which background makes a better photo, blurred or not as blurred? Also, why is so little of the image even in focus with an aperture of f/18? Okay, is it because it's a zoom lens? Doesn't make sense to me. Great question. All right, so the reason why so little of the photo is in focus, even right here at f/18, is back to what we were talking about here. It is one of the aspects of depth of field is your subject's distance from camera. So if you're using a lens like this, right, just say a standard, 35 millimeter lens, anything past a certain point is going to be in focus, and it can only focus, up to a certain point, like close to your lens as well. With a macro lens, it's entirely different. So the closer something is to the lens that you focus on, the further out of focus the background is going to be. Now, that may be confusing, but when you start doing macro photos, for things like, because I'll be honest with you, when I started shooting like rings and details and stuff like that, and I found the exact same thing, I was like, wow, this is very difficult, because, oftentimes when you're shooting rings, it could be in a hotel room, it could be, in a church, and these places aren't lit to an f/18. So you really have to, that's when like flash comes into play, and you got to be able to, create your own light. But in this situation, instead of using flash, you went up on your ISO. Anyway, let me know if that answers your question. The closer something is to your lens, the further out of focus the background becomes, and the smaller the depth of field gets. Okay, so if you focus on something at infinity on your lens, which is like all the way out, if you focus the furthest away that your lens will focus, everything from, say, 30 feet to infinity will be in focus. Now, it doesn't mean that it'll necessarily be equal amounts of sharpness, but it will be technically in focus. Now, the closer that something gets, you start to get a range of focus. So if you're focusing at something, say 5 feet away, maybe everything between 4 feet and 7 feet will be in focus, and 5 feet just happens to land in between that. But when you get so close to your lens, like we're talking inches away, your depth of field can be just centimeters. It can be very, very tiny. If you look at this photo right here, we can see that the front of this element is in focus, but the back is not. So we can tell that our depth of field here is, again, just tiny, like centimeters. It is not much at all. So when you go to f18, like we're still encountering this. In the back, it is not perfectly sharp. Now, it actually might be perfectly sharp, but because you used an ISO of 32,000, it may just appear like it's not a very sharp image. So, yeah, things that are very close require a high depth of field to be able to get them all in focus. So I hope that makes sense. While it does have a little bit to do with what lens you're using, it is mostly the distance from your lens that is the biggest benefactor, or the biggest contributor there. So you can actually use that to your advantage, even if you have a kit lens, right? Which is kind of universally understood as like, it's not the best lens in the world, but it's going to get you through, just to be able to, get you started. If you take your stock 18 to 55 millimeter lens, when you zoom into 55 millimeters, the aperture goes to f5.6 and it can't be opened up anymore. And you would think that f5.6 wouldn't really be good for portraits. But if you bring your subject as close as they can get to your camera, like to focus on them, the whole background will be perfectly out of focus. It'll look beautiful. In fact, I think it looks better sometimes than when shooting at an f2. I know plenty of professionals who shoot in a studio setting at f8, f11, and they make beautiful portraits, and it's because they fill their frame and they're able to get the background out of focus because they get their subjects close enough. So again, I hope that makes sense to you. Let's go ahead and talk about settings here for a second. I see that you have two obviously different photos, and I'm assuming that this photo was taken just to see if you can get the whole thing in focus, whereas this one was probably your first attempt at it. Well, never mind, because I guess I had thoughts on shooting at ISO 32,000, but it looks to me as if you did it for exploratory purposes to figure out like if you can get the whole scene in focus, and not that you would actually shoot at that ISO. I would really say that ISO 6400 is the top end for most situations. Unless I'll shoot like a dark wedding reception at ISO 6400, Obviously, I'm not shooting at f7, but you get the gist of what I'm saying here, is that like that's really the top end for me before I start introducing my own light in the form of flash. All right. Randy, I know the concert photos aren't the best, but if you have any tips or tricks on shooting concerts, that's why I've included them. They were both shot with a kit lens, and now I have my dedicated 50 millimeter, which may help, but I find it very difficult trying to stay out of the way of people attending, but then being too far away without using a flash. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so good question here, Randy, as far as these concert photos. Let me go ahead and look at them for a second. What's going on? There we go. First of all, love this composition right here. This is a fantastic photo. The only way this photo could be better is if he was facing his name, like the opposite direction. This is fantastic. Okay. So let's go to this one right here, right? Okay, so the question specifically was, you were using your kit lens, but you also have a dedicated 50 mil, but it's difficult trying to stay out of the way of people attending, but then being too far away without using a flash. So, okay, so that you're not blinding the performer. Of course. So, this is a situation where you're in a very dark situation. this is a situation where you're in a dark situation. That sounded ridiculous. When you're in a dark situation like this, you need to be able to bring in as much light as possible, right? And oftentimes, the best way that we think about doing that is either using our flash, and you don't want to blind your performer, or using a faster lens, meaning, your 1.8, which in this case is your 50 millimeter lens. Now, not getting in the way of people, because a 50 millimeter lens isn't, like, you can't zoom to get your perfect composition. That's challenging. And I think that's why, if you look at the majority of concert photographers, they use zoom lenses, because it's really not up to them where they can stand. And, just like you're saying here, they can't get in the way of people watching the show. Whereas at a wedding, I can walk around pretty much wherever I want to. So to me, using prime lenses is the best option, because typically there's more light, I can move around, and they're sharper images. But regardless, I think that's what you've discovered here. You've discovered the limitation of your gear. Being able to shoot at f5.6 isn't great, because now you're using ISO 3200. Now, I think that you probably could have slowed down your shutter speed, let's just say to 250, and then that means that you could have brought your ISO down to 1600, which would have been a little bit of a cleaner image. But again, with people moving around on stage, you want to make sure that you can be able to capture them. So again, with you now having found the limitations of your lens, that's it. The option is you either use a flash, which never really looks good when you use the flash on camera from pretty far away, or you have to get a zoom lens. And I think in this case, if you were to get, okay, so let's go ahead and show you the difference here. So 5.6, 400, 3200. 5.6. Okay. You're at ISO 3200, 5.6. And let's just say, for intents and purposes, come on, you were shooting at a shutter speed of 1/500. So if you had something like a 70 to 200 f2.8 lens, which again, I know is an expensive lens, but let me show you what's going on here. You go down, you get to open up and bring in 2 additional stops of light, right? So that means not only are you able to get considerably closer, but you're also able to bring in 2 stops more of light. Remember? 1, 2. That means that then you can go down on your ISO to 1600 and then to 800. 2 stops. 1, 2. And then at ISO 800, you're going to have next to, very considerably less grain and digital noise in your image than you do at ISO 3200. And honestly, looking at your settings, it looks like that's a stage that probably had a pretty good amount of light on it. Typically, when I shoot like a reception, I'll be shooting at 3200 or 6400 at f2.8 and still have to shoot at like a shutter speed of 1/25th of a second, which means that I need 2 additional stops, or I guess 3 additional stops of light. So the stage that you were on appears to be, just by looking at your settings, about 3 stops brighter than the traditional wedding reception, I suppose, that I shoot. So that means, you're good. This is a decent exposure right here. I know that it's dark, but, we're not expecting your photo to look like this. We see that it's dark, so the photo can be a little bit darker. So again, that's what I would do in this situation. Is, unfortunately, you might just have to get a new lens, and maybe it's rent a lens for a while until you can afford it. But if this is something that you want to continue to do, then the investment might be worth it. So I hope that helps. Okay, this photo, perfect. Absolutely love it. We got context. She's clearly on a merry-go-round. Beautiful expression, beautiful exposure, fantastic. Again, I already said, I think this photo is wonderful. The only thing that I would change about this photo is, wait until he was facing the other direction, because, then it just leads your eyes to his name rather than away. But great shot. Oh, look at that little guy. I wonder if he needs a little picnic table in the backyard to eat his corn off of. I love this photo. Again, great exposure. Very nice. Settings look good. Interestingly enough, look at this. The same settings that you had appear for this photo. You know, so think about that for a second. You shot the same settings right here as you did for here. The only difference was the quantity. I'm sorry, the quality of light. The quantity was the same. They're both properly exposed. It's the quality of light that was different. So anyway, again, I hope that helped. One thing that I might do for this image is actually just crop in, probably like something like that, to increase the leading lines from the branch here to draw you into this little guy. Whereas all this space up here is just kind of, it's empty space, and it kind of detracts from the photo. But as far as getting it right in camera, if you were zoomed in all the way, then that's what you get. So it makes sense to me. Johanna, okay. Are we looking at, let's see, are these compositions here? So it appears as though we have our leading lines here. I'll say, you know, similarly what I said the other day on the image critique for the compositions is that when you're photographing a composition, it can be difficult to know what to focus on because you don't have a clear subject, right? So you're trying to photograph the fact that you fully understand what leading lines are. And again, you nailed it. Like, you get it. This is definitely leading lines. But because there's no subject, say if somebody was like at the top of this road right there where all those leaves were, and they were like in the air jumping, whew, powerful photo, right? Then this composition would do exactly what it was intended to do. And then even this little spot in the sky right there would be used to frame the person jumping. But if we're just photographing the composition, it can be hard to know what to focus on because there's no clear subject in this photo. But the composition is spot on. So right here, it looks like we got rule of thirds and even a little bit of framing as well. Oops, my computer there. And yeah, it looks like, you know, we got rule of... I don't know if I would consider this rule of thirds. I think that I would consider this more framing because if we go back to the idea of pattern interruptions, right? If you go back to the idea of pattern interruptions, what is the only the only thing that isn't organic, or the only thing that isn't what am I trying to say here? So we have, like, we get it. We have a parking lot. We have the parking bumps. We see that this is a parking lot. We have some grass. We have a trail or a walking path or even a road. And then we have more grass. And then up top, we have some trees and some sky. So it's like layered, right? Parking lot, grass, parking lot, grass, sky. And then out of nowhere, there's a tree that kind of, you know, brings your attention. Or in this case, it's being used as a frame because it brings your eye into this guy right here. So what you're doing is by photographing this buffalo or this bison, I'm not even sure if there's a difference between the two, you are interrupting the pattern, like this layered pattern here. Let's go ahead and see if I can... Is there a way to just easily remove all this? What's object eraser? Oh, nice. So again, what you're doing is you're interrupting this layered pattern of layer, 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 right? And then we interrupt it with this guy here. So as far as, and then this tree, of course, is being used to kind of direct your attention and frame out that pattern to again bring your eyes to this. I'm just gonna call him a buffalo, to this buffalo. So I think it works. I like it a lot. Like a screenshot, and in fact, I definitely should be looking for more kind of layered patterns like that. We got the leading lines here, and then we got a frame as well. This is another one of those situations to where I think that the exposure spot on, right? It looks good. It's definitely a fall day, but we're photographing the composition itself. So we have this tree, we have this tree, and we have this tree, right? And then this kind of like bleeds into, like, you're not going to look over there. Probably not going to look over there. With these branches, we're definitely not going to look over there. So where does that leave our eyes, right? Like, where does it go? It goes right here. So while we're looking at the water, you know, the tree branches definitely did their jobs to get us to look at the water. We're photographing the composition here. Now, if we would have had a little like, you know, I don't know. Come on, what's going on here? Oh. If we would have had like a little, you know, duck, you know, quack, just like floating along in the water, that looks like a not a duck. But if there was a little duck right there, then this composition would be perfectly bringing our eyes to that subject. So again, while you got the composition perfect, you got it great, we're just missing the subject to that the composition leads our eyes to. So I hope that makes sense. And then looking at your settings here, yeah, they look just fine. They look good. All right, Eli. Whoa, very cool. Two very different trees. I like that. Again, this is a great pattern interrupter right here. Entirely blue sky. See, if this sky was filled with clouds, it would be a little bit more difficult to be able to tell, like, what's the subject? And the subject is we have two very competing different trees here. So great job. It's very cool. So 200. I like this photo. I think it's a little bit underexposed, but I understand, you know, sometimes when you're shooting, you underexpose to be able to make the colors a little bit richer. I still think that this photo could probably be a stop brighter. You know, maybe if you would have shot it at 1/400th of a second rather than 1/800, that exposure would probably be a little bit closer to right. We got this guy. Oh, wait. So I guess then it would have been 1200. If you would have shot this at a shutter speed of 1200, it would have been closer to a correct exposure. And then we got this one. While I like this photo and I like the exposure, unfortunately, I'm missing the focus point. I'm not sure where the focus... Oh, okay. It's going to be right there. Oh, so right in the center of the frame. So, again, for a photo like this, I would want... Like, my eye wants to see this thing. I see lots of color. I see lots of texture. I see different lights on there, and it looks beautiful. And that's what I want to see in focus instead of these petals. So I like the composition. I like the exposure. I just think that this is just a case of a missed focus point there. Woohoo! Go Dodgers. Got leading lines. Yeah, I've definitely noticed. I'm going to say the same thing that I said to Johanna is that we're photographing the composition here rather than the composition lending itself to helping us find our subject. So what I love is that, you know, you have found that you didn't have to be in the direct center of the trail, is that we have leading lines. Go back. We have different types of leading lines here, right? This goes out, so... But then also, we have... So that gets bigger. And then even... This gets bigger as well. So this all shrinks away to the horizon. And I like that a lot. So fantastic job, you know, going a little bit out of your comfort zone to be able to capture this composition. It's a little bit different than most, and I think it works really well. Again, it would just be next time focusing on making sure that your composition lends itself to bringing the viewer's attention to whatever your subject would be. I love making little fun drawings like this. Just adding a little bit of detail. Okay, anyway, done. Look at that. I have one comment to make here. All right. First of all, fantastic photo. How adorable is this? I would definitely print this out. I would just simply crop in like this, right? Try to crop out some of that wheelbarrow right there, that little wagon, because we don't need to see it. I want to zoom in a little bit and keep the pumpkins more symmetrical in the frame, right? Left to right, so that we have obviously our subject right here in the center of the frame, rather than looking at the basket, the wagon right there. But exposure looks great, light looks great, composition looks good as well. So I hope that helps. I was going to turn on my camera to look at me, but I guess, oh, wait a second. Well, I guess there would technically be a way to open up my, oh, no, that's my computer looking for a home humidifier. There we go. So anyway, I hope that helped. I hope that made sense as far as compositions go in this image critique. I know that the photography can be a struggle sometimes, right? It can be challenging, but you guys are definitely putting in the work, and I can see that you're going out and you're practicing and you're trying to make it the best that you can, and you all are doing a great job. And I look forward to seeing the photos that y'all come up with in the future. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And again, great job. All right, talk to you guys soon.